was born into a world of complete darkness. The doctors told her parents that she would never see the sunrise, never watch the colors of autumn leaves falling, and never look into the eyes of someone she loved. But what lacked in sight, she more than made up for in her extraordinary gift for music. From the moment she first touched a violin at the age of 4, something magical happened. Her tiny fingers moved across the strings as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Her mother, Sophia, watched in amazement as her blind daughter played notes that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her soul. It was as if the violin was an extension of herself, a voice that spoke when words could not. The family lived in a small town nestled in the hills of northern Italy. Their stone cottage sat at the edge of a vineyard that had belonged to the family for generations. Sophia worked as a seamstress, taking in clothes from the wealthy families in the nearby city. His father had passed away when she was just 2 years old, leaving behind nothing but photographs that could never see and stories that her mother rarely told. Growing up, often asked about her father, Sophia would give short answers, saying only that Marco was a good man who loved his family very much. There were no extended relatives who visited, no grandparents who came for holidays, and no cousins who played with during summer vacations. It was always just and her mother, alone in their little cottage, surrounded by the sounds of the vineyard and the music that created. By the time turned 12, her talent had become well known throughout the region. Music teachers traveled from far away just to hear her play. They called her a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent, but did not care about fame or recognition. For her, the violin was simply the way she experienced the world. When she played, she could see colors in her mind. The high notes were bright yellows and whites. The low notes were deep purples and blues. Music painted pictures in her darkness, giving her a kind of sight that no doctor could explain. Sophia worked extra hours to pay for music education. She enrolled her daughter in the finest music academy in Milan, a 3-hour train journey from their home. Every weekend, Sophia would accompany to the city, holding her hand as they navigated the busy streets. The academy was an old building with high ceilings and marble floors. Loved the way her footsteps echoed in the hallways, creating their own kind of music. At the academy, met Professor, an elderly man who had once performed in the greatest concert halls of Europe. He had heard about the blind girl from and was curious to meet her. When played for him the first time, tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. He had spent 60 years listening to violinists from all over the world, but he had never heard anyone play with such pure emotion. Professor became his mentor. He taught her not just technique, but the history and soul of music. He told her stories about the great composers, about their struggles and triumphs. He explained how music could tell stories without words, how a single note could carry the weight of 1,000 emotions. Absorbed everything like a sponge, her hungry mind always wanting more. One afternoon, when was 15, Professor gave her an unusual assignment. He placed an old, worn sheet of music in her hands. The paper was thick and rough, clearly very old. Ran her fingers across it, feeling the raised bumps of handwritten musical notation that someone had transcribed into Braille for her. "This piece has no name," Professor said, his voice thoughtful. "It was written by an unknown composer probably 100 years ago or more. I found it in an antique shop in Venice many years ago. No one has ever been able to play it properly. The melody is strange, almost haunting. I want you to try." Took the music home with her that weekend. She spent hours in her small bedroom, her fingers tracing the notes over and over again. When she finally lifted her bow to play, something unexpected happened. The melody felt familiar, like a song she had heard in a dream long ago. The notes seemed to flow through her without effort, as if her hands already knew where to go. Sophia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the music. The wooden spoon fell from her hand, clattering against the floor. Her face went pale and her hands began to tremble. She stood frozen, listening to the haunting melody that drifted through the cottage like a ghost from the past. After a few moments, She rushed to his room and burst through the door. "Where did you get that music?" Sophia demanded, her voice sharp with something had never heard before. Was it fear, anger, could not tell. "Professor gave it to me," replied, confused by her mother's reaction. "He said it was written by an unknown composer. Why? What is wrong, Mama?" Sophia did not answer. She simply took the sheet music from his hands and left the room without another word. That night, heard her mother crying through the thin walls of their cottage. She wanted to go to her to comfort her, but something held her back. There was a secret here, something hidden in the shadows of her family's past, and was determined to uncover it. The next morning, Sophia acted as if nothing had happened. She served breakfast with a smile and chatted about the weather and the neighbors, but noticed that her mother's voice was different, strained somehow. There was a tension in the air that had never been there before. Did not mention the music again, but she could not stop thinking about it. The melody played on a loop in her mind, day and night. She found herself humming it while she brushed her teeth, tapping the rhythm on her desk during school. There was something about that piece that called to her, something that felt deeply personal. A few weeks later, returned to the academy for her weekly lesson with Professor. Before she could even sit down, she asked him about the mysterious sheet music. "Where exactly did you find it?" she asked. "You said an antique shop in Venice, but do you remember anything else? Anything about who might have written it?" Professor was quiet for a long moment. Could hear him shifting in his chair, could sense his hesitation. "The shop owner told me an interesting story," he finally said. "He said the music came from an estate sale, from the belongings of a wealthy family. The family had fallen on hard times after a scandal many years ago. Most of their possessions were sold to pay debts. This sheet music was found hidden in a secret compartment of an old desk." "A scandal?" Leaned forward, her curiosity burning. "What kind of scandal?" "I do not know the details," Professor admitted. "But the shop owner mentioned something about a forbidden love affair, a child born out of wedlock, and a family torn apart by secrets and lies. It all happened decades ago, long before either of us was born." His mind raced with possibilities. She thought about her mother's strange reaction to the music, the tears she had heard through the walls, the secrets that seemed to surround her family like fog. Could there be a connection? It seemed impossible, and yet the melody felt so familiar, as if it had always been a part of her. That evening called her mother from the academy's telephone. She told Sophia that she would be staying late to practice and would take a later train home. It was a lie, the first real lie had ever told her mother. Instead of practicing, took a taxi to the Venice address that Professor had given her, the antique shop where the mysterious music had been found. The shop was located on a narrow street near one of the canals. Could smell the water, hear the gentle lapping of waves against stone. The taxi driver helped her to the door, and she entered alone, her white cane tapping against the wooden floor. "Hello," she called out. "Is anyone here?" An old man's voice answered from somewhere in the back of the shop. "Coming, coming, just a moment." Heard shuffling footsteps approaching. She introduced herself and explained why she had come. She told the shop owner about the sheet music, about her strange connection to the melody, and about her mother's reaction. The old man listened carefully. When finished speaking, he was quiet for a long time. "I remember that music well," he finally said. "It was part of a large collection from the Bellini estate. The Bellinis were once one of the most powerful families in this region. They owned vineyards, factories, and some of the finest properties in Venice. But their fortune disappeared after a terrible scandal in the 1950s. "What happened?" asked her heart pounding. "The only son of the family, a young man named Bellini, fell in love with a servant girl. His parents forbade the relationship. They were proud people, concerned with status and reputation. When they discovered that the servant girl was pregnant, they sent her away. They paid her family to leave the region and never return." Felt a chill run down her spine. What happened to the baby? No one knows for certain, the old man said. Some say the baby was given up for adoption. Others say the mother kept the child and raised it in secret, never recovered from losing the woman he loved. He died a few years later, alone and heartbroken. The family never spoke of the scandal again, but it destroyed them from the inside. Without an heir, the Bellini name died out. Thanked the old man and left the shop in a daze. Her mind was spinning with questions. Could she be connected to this story somehow? Was her father related to the Bellinis, or perhaps her mother? The timeline seemed right. If the scandal happened in the 50s, the child would be in their 60s now, around the age of mother. On the train ride home, tried to piece together the fragments of information she had gathered. Her mother never talked about her own parents or her childhood. Whenever asked, Sophia changed the subject or gave vague answers. Had always assumed it was simply too painful to discuss, but now she wondered if there was more to it. When arrived home, she found her mother sitting in the dark living room. The cottage was silent except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. "Mama," said softly, "are you all right?" Sophia did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Where were you really tonight? Do not lie to me. I called the academy. They said you left hours ago." His heart sank. She had never been good at deception, and she did not want to lie to her mother again. She sat down across from Sophia and took a deep breath. "I went to Venice," she admitted. "To the antique shop where Professor found that music. I had to know more about it, Mama. I had to understand why it affected you so strongly." The silence that followed was heavier than any had ever experienced. She could hear her mother's breathing, could sense the tension radiating from her body. "You should not have done that," Sophia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things you do not understand, things I have tried to protect you from your entire life." "Then help me understand," pleaded. "I am not a child anymore. I deserve to know the truth about my family, about my past. That melody means something, I can feel it in my bones. Please, Mama, tell me the truth." For a long moment, Sophia said nothing. Then slowly, she began to speak. Her voice was distant, as if she was traveling back through time to a place she had tried to forget. "My mother's name was," Sophia began. "She was a servant in the Bellini household. She was young and beautiful, with a voice like an angel. She would sing while she worked, old folk songs from her village. Heard her singing one day, and he fell in love with her instantly." Listened in stunned silence as her mother continued the story. "And had carried on their affair in secret, meeting in the gardens at night, sharing dreams of a future together. When discovered she was pregnant, they made plans to run away together, to start a new life far from the Bellini family and their expectations. But's parents discovered the plan before they could escape. They confronted, called her terrible names, and accused her of trying to trap their son for his money. They gave her a choice: leave immediately and never contact again, or they would have her family thrown out of their home and blacklisted from every employer in the region. Was heartbroken, but she had no choice. Her family depended on her. She took the money the Bellinis offered and disappeared into the night. Searched for her for months, but his parents had covered their tracks well. He never found her. "My mother gave birth to me alone in a charity hospital in Rome," Sophia continued, her voice breaking. "She raised me by herself, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. She never told me who my father was until she was dying. She gave me a small box of his belongings, things he had given her during their time together. Among them was the original copy of that music." His breath caught in her throat. "The melody," wrote it. "For my mother," Sophia confirmed. "It was his love song to her, the only thing he ever created. He was not a trained musician, but he had a gift for melody. My mother said he would play it for her on a violin he kept hidden in his room, late at night when his parents were asleep." "But if you have the original, how did a copy end up in the antique shop?" "Must have made copies," Sophia said. "Or perhaps he gave one to a friend. I do not know. But when I heard you playing it, I felt like I was hearing my mother's voice again. It brought back so many memories, so much pain. Reached out and found her mother's hand. It was trembling. She squeezed it gently, trying to offer comfort. "Why did you never tell me?" asked. "Why did you keep this secret?" Sophia sighed heavily. "I was ashamed. I was the illegitimate child of a servant and a rich man who abandoned my mother. When I married your father, I told him about my past, and he accepted me completely. But after he died, I wanted to give you a fresh start. I wanted you to grow up without the burden of our family's painful history." "What about my father?" asked, a new question forming in her mind. Was he connected to this story somehow? Sophia's hand went rigid in its grasp. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "That," Sophia finally said, "is a story for another time. It is late and we are both exhausted. Let us get some sleep and we will talk more tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. At least not the conversation was hoping for. Over the following weeks, Sophia deflected every attempt to discuss the past. She changed the subject, found excuses to leave the room, and eventually asked to stop asking questions altogether. Respected her mother's wishes, but she could not stop thinking about what she had learned. She had a grandfather she had never known, a man who had written a beautiful melody for the woman he loved. She was connected to the Bellini family, one of the most prominent families in the region's history. And there was still a mystery surrounding her father, a secret her mother refused to share. As the months passed, threw herself into her music with renewed passion. She practiced the melody her grandfather had written until she could play it in her sleep. She began incorporating it into her performances, adding her own variations and interpretations. Audiences were mesmerized by the haunting piece, though none of them knew its true origin. On her 16th birthday, performed her first major concert at the Academy. The audience included music critics, talent scouts, and some of the most influential people in the Italian classical music world. Played a program of classical pieces, but she saved her grandfather's melody for last. As the final notes faded into silence, the audience sat in stunned awe. Then slowly they began to applaud. The applause grew louder and louder until it became a standing ovation. Stood on the stage, her violin pressed against her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wished her grandfather could have been there to hear it. She wished he could have known that his music had survived, that it had found its way to his granddaughter, and that it would live on through her. After the concert, a woman approached backstage. She was elderly, probably in her 80s, with a voice that was refined and cultured. "That last piece you played," the woman said, "where did you learn it?" Hesitated. "It is a family heirloom. It was written by my grandfather." The woman was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was shaking. "Your grandfather would not happen to be Bellini, would he?" His heart stopped. "How do you know that name?" "Because," the woman said slowly, "Bellini was my brother." The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. She reached out blindly, and someone caught her arm to steady her. Her mind was racing, trying to process what she had just heard. "That is impossible," whispered. "Had no siblings, he was an only child." The woman let out a bitter laugh. "That is what our parents wanted everyone to believe. I was the family's shameful secret. I was born with a twisted spine, a deformity that our proud parents could not accept. They sent me away to live with relatives in Switzerland, pretended I did not exist, only knew the truth. Only he ever visited me, ever treated me like family." Felt her knees go weak. She was guided to a chair, where she sat in stunned silence as the woman continued her story. "My name is Margherita Bellini," the woman said. "I am your great-aunt, and I have spent the last 60 years searching for my brother's child." Margherita Bellini's words hung in the air like the final note of a symphony, resonating with an intensity that could feel deep in her chest. The backstage area had grown quiet. The other musicians and staff had drifted away, sensing that something private and profound was unfolding. His hands trembled as she clutched her violin case. A great aunt. She had a great aunt. After years of believing she had no extended family, here was someone connected to her by blood, someone who had known her grandfather, someone who might hold the answers to all the questions that had haunted her. "How did you find me?" finally managed to ask. Margarita settled into a chair beside her. Could smell her perfume, something delicate and expensive, like roses mixed with old books. "I read about your concert in the newspaper," Margarita explained. "The article mentioned that you would be performing an original piece that had been passed down through your family. When I arrived tonight and heard that melody, I knew immediately. Composed it for. He played it for me once during one of his visits to Switzerland. He was so in love with her, so full of hope for their future. It was the last time I ever saw him truly happy." Felt tears prickling at her eyes. "What happened to him after left?" Margarita's voice grew heavy with sorrow. "He was never the same. Our parents thought they were doing the right thing, protecting the family name, but they destroyed their son in the process. Stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring about anything. He searched for years, but our parents had hidden her too well. Eventually, he gave up hope. He died of a broken heart. The doctors said it was a fever, but I knew the truth. He simply stopped wanting to live." The tragedy of it washed over like a wave. Her grandfather had loved her grandmother so deeply that losing her had cost him his life. And all because of pride, because of social status, because the Bellini family could not accept a servant as their son's wife. "I need to tell my mother," said. "She will want to meet you." Margarita reached out and took his hand. Her skin was thin and papery, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "There is more you need to know first," Margarita said. "More secrets that have been buried for far too long. Before you speak to your mother, there are things I must show you." Hesitated. She trusted this woman instinctively, felt a connection to her that went beyond logic. But she also remembered her mother's reluctance to discuss the past, the pain that seemed to surface whenever old wounds were reopened. "What kind of things?" asked cautiously. "Documents," Margarita replied. "Letters, photographs, evidence of what truly happened all those years ago, evidence that your mother may not even know exists." Against her better judgment, agreed to accompany Margarita to her hotel. She called her mother from saying that she had been invited to a dinner with important people from the music world and would be home later that night. It was another lie, and the guilt sat heavy in her stomach, but she had come too far to turn back now. Margarita's hotel was one of the finest in Milan. Could tell by the way her footsteps echoed off marble floors, by the hushed voices and refined atmosphere. They took an elevator to the top floor, where Margarita had a suite with views of the city that would never see. "Please sit," Margarita said, guiding to a plush sofa. "Would you like some tea?" Accepted, more to have something to do with her hands than because she was thirsty. As Margarita prepared the tea, heard her moving around the room, opening drawers and rustling through papers. Finally, Margarita sat down across from her, heard her place something heavy on the coffee table between them. "This is a box of personal belongings," Margarita explained. "After he died, our parents burned most of his things, anything that reminded them of the scandal. But I managed to save this box. I bribed one of the servants to smuggle it out before the bonfire. I have kept it hidden for 60 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal its contents." His heart raced. "What is inside?" "Letters," Margarita said. "Dozens of letters that wrote to but was never able to send. They tell the full story of their love affair, including details that no one else knows. But there is one letter in particular that you need to hear, a letter that wrote on the night he died." Margarita's voice wavered as she unfolded the old paper, heard the gentle crinkle of aged parchment, and imagined her grandfather's hand moving across the page, pouring out his heart in his final hours. "My dearest," Margarita began to read. "If you are reading this, then I am gone. I hope that somehow this letter finds its way to you, though I have no way of knowing where you are or what has become of you. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. Every day without you has been a torment, an endless darkness that no amount of wealth or privilege could illuminate. Listened, her eyes closed as Margarita continued reading. Wrote about his regrets, his anger at his parents, his desperate attempts to find. He wrote about the child they had created together, the child he had never been allowed to meet. I have made arrangements, Margarita read. In the event of my death, a portion of my inheritance will be held in trust for our child. My parents cannot touch it. It is protected by law. The documents are with my solicitor, hidden where my parents will never find them. I pray that one day our child will claim what is rightfully theirs. I pray that they will know how much I loved them, even though I was never able to hold them in my arms. Margarita fell silent. The only sound in the room was ragged breathing as she processed what she had just heard. "There is an inheritance," whispered. "My mother has an inheritance." "A substantial one," Margarita confirmed. "Was not as foolish as our parents believed. He had a solicitor he trusted, a man who helped him set up the trust without our parents' knowledge. The money has been sitting in a bank account for 6 decades, accumulating interest. It is worth a fortune now." His mind was spinning. All those years of struggling, of her mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet, of wearing second-hand clothes and taking charity scholarships. And all along, there was money that belonged to them, money that could have changed their lives. "Why did no one ever find it?" asked. "Why did my grandmother not know about this?" Margarita sighed heavily. The solicitor died a few years after. His records were inherited by his son, who eventually retired and sold the practice. The documents were lost in the shuffle, buried in storage somewhere. By the time I started looking, the trail had gone cold. I hired investigators, but they could never locate the trust documents. "Then how do you know the money still exists?" "Because I have been searching for 60 years and I never gave up," Margarita said. 3 months ago, my latest investigator finally found a lead. An old storage facility was being cleared out, and among the boxes was one marked with the solicitor's name. Inside were the original trust documents, perfectly preserved. Felt hope rising in her chest, but also confusion. "If you found the documents, why did you not contact my mother directly?" Margarita was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because there is more to the story, more that I need to tell you before you learn about it any other way. It concerns your father." A chill ran down spine. Her father, the subject her mother refused to discuss, the mystery that hung over their family like a storm cloud. "What about my father?" asked, her voice barely audible. Margarita reached out and took hands in hers. "Your father, Marco, was not who your mother believed him to be. He was a man hired by my brother to find and their child." Felt the floor drop out from under her. "What are you saying?" "After died, I made it my mission to find and fulfill my brother's wishes. I hired investigators, but progress was slow. Then, about 20 years ago, I found a young man named Marco. He was ambitious, intelligent, and struggling to make ends meet. I offered him a job, find and her daughter, report back to me, and he would be rewarded handsomely." The room seemed to close in around. She could not breathe, could not think. Her father, the man her mother had loved and mourned, had been a spy. "Marco was supposed to observe from a distance," Margarita continued, her voice heavy with guilt. "But something happened that neither of us anticipated. He fell in love with Sophia, genuinely, truly fell in love. He came to me after 6 months, told me he could not continue the deception. He wanted to tell Sophia the truth, to ask for her forgiveness, but he was afraid she would never trust him again." "Did he tell her?" demanded. "Did she know?" "Eventually, yes. Shortly before you were born, Marco confessed everything to Sophia. He told her about me, about the trust, about his original mission. It was devastating for her. She felt betrayed, manipulated. But she also loved him, and she saw that his love for her was genuine. They agreed to start fresh, to put the past behind them and focus on their future together." His head was pounding. Everything she thought she knew about her family was being dismantled piece by piece. If my mother knows all this, why has she never claimed the inheritance? Why has she never contacted you? Margarita released hands and sat back in her chair. Pride, she said simply. The same destructive pride that ruined my family decades ago. Sophia did not want Bellini money. She did not want to be connected to a family that had caused her mother so much pain. When Marco died, she cut off all contact with me. She moved to, changed her name back to, and tried to erase any connection to the past. But the money could have changed our lives, protested. We struggled for years. We barely had enough to eat sometimes. I know, Margarita said, her voice filled with regret. I sent money anyway, anonymously. Small amounts that would not raise suspicion. The scholarships you received for your music education. I arranged those. The anonymous donations that kept your mother's seamstress business afloat during hard times. That was me. I have been watching over you both from a distance, doing what I could without violating Sophia's wishes. Sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb everything she had learned. Her entire life had been shaped by forces she never knew existed. Her education, her opportunities, even her introduction to Professor had all been orchestrated by this woman she had just met. Professor said suddenly, did you arrange for him to give me that music, the melody my grandfather composed? Margarita was quiet for a moment. Yes, she finally admitted. I gave him the copy years ago, asked him to pass it along to you when the time was right. I wanted you to discover your heritage on your own terms, to feel the connection to your grandfather before you knew the truth. Felt a surge of emotions, anger at being manipulated, gratitude for all the hidden support, grief for a grandfather she had never known, confusion about what to do next. It was overwhelming, too much to process at once. I need to go home, said, standing abruptly. I need to talk to my mother. Of course, Margarita said, rising to help her. But please be gentle with her. Sophia has carried these burdens for so long. She made the choices she thought were best. Do not judge her too harshly. Nodded, though she made no promises. She gathered her things and prepared to leave. At the door she paused. The trust money, she said. What happens to it now? It belongs to Sophia, Margarita replied, and to you eventually, if she is willing to accept it. Left the hotel and took a taxi to the train station. The journey home felt endless, her mind churning with questions and revelations. By the time she reached, it was nearly midnight. The cottage was dark except for a single light in the kitchen window. Sophia was waiting for her at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. In her hands she held an old photograph that could not see. Margarita called me, Sophia said, her voice hollow. She told me everything, about meeting you, about what she revealed. Stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The familiar smells of home surrounded her. Lavender from her mother's sachets, the faint scent of violin rosin, the earthy aroma of the vineyard outside. Why did you never tell me? Asked, her voice cracking with emotion. All these years, all these secrets, I deserve to know. Sophia sank into a chair at the kitchen table. I know, she whispered. I know you did, but every time I tried to tell you I could not find the words. The past was so painful. I watched my mother die with a broken heart, still loving a man who had been taken from her. I did not want that legacy for you. I wanted you to be free. Free, repeated incredulously. I have been trapped in ignorance my entire life. I had a grandfather who loved me, a great-aunt who has been watching over me, an inheritance that could have changed everything. And you kept it all from me. Sophia began to cry, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. Stood frozen, torn between anger and compassion. This was her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her alone, who had worked her fingers to the bone so could pursue her dream of music. Finally, moved forward and knelt beside her mother's chair. She took Sophia's hands in hers, feeling the calluses from years of sewing, the weathered skin that told the story of a hard life. "I am not going to pretend I am not hurt," said softly, "because I am, deeply, but I also understand why you did what you did. You were trying to protect me in your own way." Sophia looked up, her eyes filled with hope and fear. "Can you forgive me?" Considered the question carefully. Forgiveness was not something that could be given lightly, not after a lifetime of deception. But she thought about her grandfather, dying alone because of pride and unforgiveness. She thought about the Bellini family, destroyed by their inability to accept and forgive. She did not want that legacy to continue. "I forgive you," said, "but things have to change. No more secrets. From now on, we face the truth together, whatever it may be." Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. She pulled into a tight embrace, holding her as if she would never let go. Over the following weeks, and Sophia began the slow process of healing and rebuilding their relationship. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps that secrets had created. Sophia told stories about her own childhood, about its quiet strength and unwavering love. She shared memories of Marco, of how he had won her heart with his sincerity and his genuine remorse for the deception that had brought them together. Margarita visited, her first time in the cottage that had sheltered her niece for so many years. Sophia was wary at first, unable to forget the pain associated with the Bellini name, but Margarita was patient and kind. She brought photographs of images that Sophia had never seen. She brought letters and mementos, pieces of a family history that had been scattered and lost. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. Sophia saw in Margarita not a representative of the family that had wronged her mother, but a fellow survivor of their cruelty. Margarita had been cast out because of her disability, hidden away and forgotten just as had been. They were both victims of the same rigid pride. The question of the inheritance remained unresolved. The money sat in the bank, accruing interest, waiting for someone to claim it. Sophia was still reluctant, still wrestling with the idea of accepting anything from the Bellini family. It was who finally convinced her. On a warm spring evening, as they sat together in the vineyard watching the sunset that could only imagine, she made her case. "This money is not from the family that hurt grandmother," said. "It is from grandfather. He set it aside for you because he loved you, even though he never got to meet you. Accepting it is not betraying grandmother's memory. It is honoring grandfather's wishes." Sophia was quiet for a long time, considering her daughter's words. "When did you become so wise?" she finally asked, a hint of a smile in her voice. "I learned from you," replied. "You taught me that strength is not about carrying burdens alone. It is about knowing when to accept help, when to let others in." The next morning, Sophia contacted the solicitor handling the trust and began the process of claiming her inheritance. It was not about the money itself, though the sum was life-changing. It was about closure, about accepting her place in a complicated family history, about giving the opportunities that had been to end. With the resources now available to them, his musical career flourished. She enrolled in the most prestigious conservatory in Europe, studying under masters who had once seemed impossibly out of reach. She performed in concert halls around the world, always including her grandfather's melody in her repertoire. The piece became her signature, the song that audiences waited for, the haunting melody that never failed to move listeners to tears. Margarita became a regular presence in their lives. Despite her advanced age, she attended as many of his performances as her health would allow. She became the grandmother figure that had always longed for, telling stories of the old days and offering wisdom gleaned from a lifetime of observation. On his 18th birthday, Margarita presented her with a gift. It was original violin, the instrument on which he had composed the melody for. It had been hidden away for decades, preserved in perfect condition. His fingers trembled as she held the violin. She could almost feel her grandfather's presence, his love and his sorrow embedded in every curve of the wood. When she raised the bow and played the first notes of his melody, The sound was richer and more beautiful than anything she had ever produced. It was as if himself was playing through her, finally completing the song he had written for the woman he loved, finally connecting with the granddaughter he had never known. As the last note faded away, felt something shift inside her. The darkness that had been her constant companion since birth seemed less absolute somehow. She still could not see the world around her, could not perceive colors or shapes or light. But she understood now that sight was not the only way to experience the world. Through music, through love, through the connections that bound her to her family across generations, she could see more clearly than she ever had before. The Bellini family had endured tragedy, separation, and decades of misunderstanding. But they had also produced something beautiful, a blind violinist whose music could make the whole world see. Years later, when stood on the stage of the Vienna Philharmonic for the greatest performance of her career, she dedicated her concert to three people: the servant girl who had loved fearlessly, the young man who had given everything for that love, and Sophia, the mother who had carried the weight of their story so that could fly free. As the applause washed over her like a wave, smiled. She was no longer just a blind girl with a gift for music. She was the living bridge between past and present, the melody that had finally been completed, the secret that had finally been told. And somewhere she knew her grandfather was listening. The story of spread far beyond the concert halls where she performed. Musicians and journalists alike were fascinated by her history, by the romantic tragedy that had shaped her family for generations. Gave interviews, always speaking with grace and humility about her grandfather's legacy. The melody composed became known as the Bellini Romance, a title chose to honor both her grandfather and the love that had inspired it. Sheet music was published, recordings were made, and the piece entered the standard repertoire of violinists around the world. What had once been a forgotten song, hidden in a secret compartment, now touched millions of hearts. Sophia used her portion of the inheritance to establish a foundation in its name. The Bellini Fund provided scholarships for young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring that talent would never be wasted because of poverty or circumstance. Every year, the foundation held a concert bringing world-class musicians to the tiny town that had sheltered the family for so long. Margarita lived to see his 21st birthday, passing away peacefully in her sleep just a few weeks later. Her last words to her were simple: "Your grandfather would be so proud." Mourned her great-aunt deeply, but she also celebrated the years they had been given together. Margarita had waited a lifetime to reunite her family, had never given up hope even when hope seemed impossible. Her persistence had made everything possible. In her will, Margarita left the Bellini estate in Venice. It had fallen into disrepair over the decades, but could not bear to sell it. Instead, she restored it to its former glory and converted it into a music school for blind children. The Bellini Academy for the Arts opened its doors on what would have been his 100th birthday, a fitting tribute to the man whose love had started everything. Never married, though she had no shortage of admirers, she devoted her life to her music and to the academy, teaching the next generation of blind musicians that their disability was not a limitation, but a different way of experiencing the world. Many of her students went on to successful careers, carrying forward the legacy she had inherited. On the day turned 50, she returned to the cottage in where she had grown up. Sophia was long gone by then, having passed away 10 years earlier with holding her hand. The cottage had been preserved as a museum, open to visitors who wanted to learn about the remarkable family that had lived there. Walked through the rooms she knew by heart, her fingers trailing along the walls, remembering. She paused in her old bedroom where she had first played her grandfather's melody all those years ago. She could still feel the weight of that moment, the sense that something important was beginning. From her case she heard grandfather's violin. She raised it to her shoulder, positioned the bow, and began to play. The Bellini Romance filled the cottage, drifting out through the open windows, floating across the vineyard that still surrounded the property. And as she played, felt the same sensation she had experienced so many times before, the darkness receding, the world becoming visible through sound. She saw Anne, young and in love, dancing in the garden of the Bellini estate. She saw her mother, working late into the night to give a better life. She saw Margherita, the forgotten sister who had never forgotten her family. She saw herself as a child, small fingers finding their way across the strings for the first time. The past and present merged in the music, all the joy and sorrow, all the secrets and revelations, all the love that had transcended generations and circumstances. Played on, the blind violinist whose melody had uncovered a forgotten family secret and transformed it into a legacy that would never be forgotten. When the last note faded, lowered her violin and smiled. She was home. She had always been home. The music had shown her the way. And the secret was no longer secret. It was a song, singing itself into eternity.